It's not quite 7 o'clock.
Councillor Bailey, you are now live on YouTube.
Can we wait just a moment, because we're at 18:59, so if we can wait just one more minute to start at night. Oh, near we are, it's 1900 hours. So if you're happy to start the meeting, that's lovely. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to everyone for our second Virtual Standards Committee meeting. Tonight, it's quite likely that this will be viewed by more people than normal, because it's being streamed on YouTube. So let us start the meeting now. Item 1 is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies, Monitoring Officer?
I've not received any apologies, Councillor Bailey, in Democratic Services.
Okay, that's fine. So no. Thank you.
Can we note, Helen, that the 2 independent members aren't here? Yes, it may well be that they arrive later.
Fine. Item 2, this is to approve the minutes of the meeting on September the 28th, 2020. And these minutes can be found on pages 1 to 2. So if you'd like to go through the 2 pages with me, on page 1, are there any comments that you'd like to make from page 1 on the minutes? And any comments on page 2? So are you happy to accept that these minutes are accurate? Do I have a proposer? Councillor Clark and Councillor Cumberlack as the seconder. Thank you. On item 3, do I have any declarations of interest, please? Do I have any declarations of interest, please? No? And welcome to our independent member, which is Sabrina Melkin. Thank you for joining us. So we're just waiting for one person now, but thank you for joining us at this stage. So item 3 is cases and work update. So if I could ask the monitoring officer's report, please.
Good evening, councillors. This is the first of 2 reports from me this evening, and the first one is my case update report. Councillors are familiar with this report. It is produced to give councillors information.
Chairman, sorry to interrupt, Sanjit, if I can interrupt, sorry. You're very, very faint.
Is that better?
Not really.
Is that any better?
Slightly.
Hello?
Yeah, it's still about the same.
It may well be. If councillors could bear with me one moment, I think it's easier if I go into a separate room. I'm in the same room with Councillor Bailey at the moment, and perhaps it's the headphones. Bear with me. I'm going to next door.
Yeah, I have lost everything on my screen except for one individual councillor.
Still here, we can see you.
Thank you. So Sanjit will just go into another room so we don't have problems with echo and so on to read her report. Just bear with us a moment.
Evening, is that better?
Yep.
Okay, so apologies for that. This is the first of 2 reports that I'm going to present this evening, my case update report. Councillors are Familiar with this report. It's the report I present to every committee to detail the complaints that I've received since the last meeting, in this case in September last year. Since that meeting, I've received a total of 9 complaints, and those are set out at table A for members to note. As councillors are familiar, the table confirms whether the complaint relates to a borough, parish or town councillor, if the complaint was made by a member of the public or another borough, parish or town councillor. It also details the nature of the complaint and any action taken to address the complaint. In respect of other work, I have continued to be available during the year to provide support on questions raised by councillors, and also continue to support the member development group. That's all I intended to say in relation to that report, councillors. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Sanjit. Before we have any questions, I would just like to say that whilst Bingham Town Council is referenced in Sanjit's report, I remind you that no findings of facts have been made in respect of any of the complaints received. 4 of the complaints have been rejected as not meeting the initial test as set out in the council's adopted arrangements, and 5 referred for formal investigation. In the circumstances, and to protect the integrity of this committee and the investigation process, I must ask councillors that unless any member has a point to make other than in respect of the Bingham Town Council, that we follow the recommendations of Sanjit's report, note it, and move on to the next item on the agenda. So the recommendation is recommended that the committee receive and note the report. Do I have a proposer for this? You're muted, Councillor Clark.
Oh, well, you just asked if a proposer, so nobody else said anything, so I just put my hand up.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. Thank you very much. And do I have a seconder? Debbie Mason. Thank you very much indeed. So we take this to the vote, so we're happy for this to be accepted then. Okay. Item 5, standards in public life.
Can I just ask a question, actually?
Yes, by all means do, Kerry.
I appreciate that things are under investigation at the moment, and in the last minutes we documented that a letter had been sent to the town council.
Yes.
And I just wondered if the monitoring officer could just let us know if there was the follow-up letter that we requested was sent. Could we just confirm that?
Yes, I can confirm it was.
That's lovely, thank you. And obviously, as the investigations happen and findings have come out, obviously we can come back. But thank you very much, that's brilliant.
That letter, Kerry, was sent out on the 2nd of October, and you can find it on the Bingham Town Council website.
That's wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. So let us go on to the item 5, standards in public life report and the LGA model code of conduct. So if we could ask the monitoring officer for her report, please.
Thank you, Chair. This report is produced to committee tonight to provide an update in relation to the CSPL report, which was the Committee on Standards in Public Life report, which was produced in January 29, and also the Local Government Association's Model Code of Conduct. I will go through the LGA Model Code of Conduct later in my presentation, but just to pick up on a few points in the report. The CSPL have written to all chief executives since publication of their report in 2019 to ask with regards to the implementation of the best practice principles. I'm pleased to report that Rushcliffe were able to write back to the CSPL and confirm that we adopted the best practice principles at our July council. The second part of my report focuses on the LGA's model code, and councillors will recall being asked to participate in the consultation on the model code. And with with the support of the chair, responded to that consultation. Following the responses, the LGA released the model code on the 23rd of December, and it's that's brought before councillors today. The reason that the LGA have prepared a model code is really in response to the CSPL report. The CSPL were quite keen that there be a model code of conduct so that there could be consistency of codes. At the moment, we've got a situation where there's no requirement on parish councils to adopt the codes of their principal authorities, and in this case we would be the principal authority. So the idea is that with a model code there's a universal understanding of what the code of conduct is, because it's the same across the area. So that's the background to it. The LGA has been quite clear in the drafting that really at the heart of it producing the model code is that they really want to promote the role of the councillor as being something that people can aspire to do. And members are asked, therefore, to consider whether the draft code would, in their view, enhance Rushcliffe's current code, perhaps in part, completely, or not at all. And just to be clear, there's no requirement on Rushcliffe to adopt the model code. So it may well be that following discussion tonight, members may feel that they like parts of it and want to explore that further, or as I say, like it in its entirety or not at all. To support members in forming those sorts of decisions and thinking about what they might like to consider in terms of the model code, I'll take some specific points on it and we'll go through some general comments really first. So the code has been produced following extensive consultations with monitoring officers, with members, and has been, you know, the sum of a lot of hard work. The LGA really have done their best to consult on this in what actually are quite difficult circumstances because of COVID. The LGA are going to review this code annually. Members will note, having considered it from the appendix to my report, it's written in the first person, so it refers to I throughout. So that's different to Rushcliffe's code at the moment. We have been advised by the LGA that they are intending to issue some guidance. We've been given sort of March, end of April as a time frame for that. That will be very much a document that will support the model code, and the intention is that there shall be case studies in there, and it's designed to support consistency for monitoring officers across the country with some case studies and some standards. The code applies where members may be giving an impression that they're acting as a counsellor, and also extends to social media. And there are 10 specific standards of conduct that the LGA have focused on, and I'll go through the ones that really to note and to perhaps think about. So not all of them, but certain ones. The code also retains the 7 principles of public life, which members might be familiar with as the Nolan principles, but does very much seek to build on those principles and develop them. So in terms of specifics for the model code, if I could just draw members' attention to a few of the points. The first one I wanted to go through was respect, which is at number 1. There was a lot of talk around civility when the original draft was released, but that after consultation has been changed to respect. I think the feeling was respect was more universally understood. It's possible to be civil to someone and perhaps not respect them. But some are arguing that the definition is still quite limited. It mentions specifically councillors and members of the public. So members might feel that it's missing things like journalists, political agents, third-party organisations, and perhaps members wanted to give some consideration to incorporating some wording that reflects treating others with respect, so it's not limiting in that way. The second principle that I wanted to draw members' attention to was bullying and harassment. The code has been extended to include the full list of persons covered by the Equalities Act. In terms of Rushcliffe's code at the moment, Rushcliffe's code doesn't contain a list as such, but it is more general. It refers to an individual or a group. So members might want to consider that, and they may feel that a list would enhance it, but equally may feel that it may narrow it. It's a wider definition that we've got at the moment. The fourth principle I wanted to just touch on was confidentiality and access to information. The drafting of the model code essentially does mirror Rushcliffe's code at the moment, but it doesn't go as far as the definitions in the Local Government Act 1972, which are quite extensive. So members might want to give some consideration, because there's been talk that could be quite confusing, because the Local Government Act legislation hasn't been repealed, yet it's not replicated in the code. So members might want to think about enlarging that so it matches the provisions of the Local Government Act 1972. Just wanted then to go to 8, complying with the Code of Conduct. Rushcliffe's code already has a requirement to cooperate with an investigation. So members may want to form a view around that if they feel that there's anything that the model code might add. Interests are dealt with at Appendix B. The drafting does mirror the Rushcliffe Code. And what I wanted to just highlight for members was that there's no requirement to update the register during the term. So it is just on election or re-election. So members might want to think about whether they'd like to widen that. And it does relate to disclosable pecuniary interests only. Gifts and hospitality is 10, and that's just the last one that I wanted to raise. There is a requirement to register a gift within 28 days of receipt, but it doesn't extend to any gifts refused. So members might feel that that's missing there. There's also the use of a word significant, and that could mean different things to different people. So what is a significant gift? So again, is that clear enough? And it doesn't prohibit, so if a member has accepted a gift, it doesn't prohibit participation in meetings or voting. In terms of general comments, Table 1 sets out the DPIs and Table 2 sets out other registrable interests. So they are there in clarity. And committee, as I say, may consider, having read the code, that they don't feel any element of it would strengthen necessarily the Rushcliffe Code as it is currently, and therefore there's no justification for amending it. But if members are minded to consider that there could be elements of the code, or the code in entirety could enhance the Rushcliffe Code, then perhaps that is something that we could take forward to discuss as working groups, and then bring back a form of recommendations to this meeting. Those were the parts of the code that I wanted to draw councillors' attention to, and I'm happy to take any questions on that. Chair, I think Kerry White has got a hand up.
Yeah, just an observation. In terms of the expression of the code, personally, I found the expression of the "I do not" was quite powerful. And I think that phrasing certainly strengthened the Rushcliffe Code and made it more personal and harder to ignore.
Mm-hmm. John?
Oh, yeah, I disagree totally with that. With all the systems I've used, have always tended to go for the U. It's an objective and standard form that can be used throughout. And in fact, they themselves in this document do mix up U's and I's at various stages in the document.
At Sanjit's suggestion that guidance will be coming to us from the LGA in March, April time, would it be a good idea to wait until that guidance comes through? Then we can have a working group and we can actually go through the existing paperwork together with the new model code paperwork and go through it line by line and work out items that we think don't need changing, but on the other hand, items that could do with changing. This would be sort of a fairly lengthy thing to do, but so much work has gone into this report by the LGA that I do think we've got to give it a lot of consideration, and really to make this a report that we are happy to live with and accept. Richard?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've like most of the other members here, I've got the document open on one screen, and without having it and the other one pretty much side by side, it's almost impossible to do that. And we've got quite a lot of pages here for the folks who are looking in. So I mean, on the you versus I bit, I don't mind either way. I think it does make it more powerful saying I will not do this, I will not do that, I will adhere to these standards. I think that kind of makes it more of a declarative thing, and I think that's quite good. But in terms of comparing this one versus our own, then yeah, I think going away and having a look at it, comparing the two side by side, and then coming back and having a discussion would be a better way to do it, rather than just kind of looking at it as we are here, and unless everyone's already done that at the moment.
I don't know whose hand came up first. I've got 3 hands in front of me now. So can I go to, I apologise if I haven't got you in the right order, but Councillor Ben Gray, what would you like to contribute, please?
I'd like to say that I'm in the I camp, first of all. I did agree on that. I think it would be desirable as to take on the LGA recommendations. I think not perhaps in their entirety, but is in as complete a form as possible. And I think Sanjit sort of made some great recommendations there. And I think taking on your suggestions as well, Councillor Bailey, that this does need to be looked at. And I think perhaps if we agreed a working group today, so that it would be ready for when those further recommendations come, and again, so we could put together a final document to be approved at this group at a later stage. But yeah, I think that would take into account some more of those things.
Thank you. And Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, well, I agree that we need to probably have a working group and compare them, because unfortunately in these COVID times, and I'm looking at 135 pages electronically on the screen, and it's pretty damned impossible to digest it all properly without sitting there with it on spread out on the table. I have 1 or 2 where I've read through, and I've got 1 or 2 questions which perhaps I could pose at this stage, and either Mr. Bagley or Mrs. Sol can give me their interpretation of the legal meanings, which because I think it's wonderful on page 9 of 135, I think page 23 of the report, paragraph 4 of the LGA suggestions, and it's talking about confidentiality and access. So number 4.B. Roman numeral 4, and it talks about the disclosure is reasonable, and it talks about being reasonable elsewhere. Would anybody like to put a legal definition on the word reasonable? I think you alluded to it earlier when you said, what's the definition of the word substantial? So, I'm sure that we've got, what's the population of this country? 67 million different definitions of the word reasonable. The other one, it's mentioned in the best practice list. It talks about CSV. I confess I don't know what CSV is. And I did want to talk about something else in the committee document, but perhaps we can deal with that later. How do you want to deal with this, Chairman? Do you want to deal with the LGA document first?
How would it suit you, Sanjit? Which document would you feel would be the better one to start with?
That's fine. If I can just deal with the question first, in terms of reasonableness, it's what us lawyers term as being Wednesbury reasonable, and that was a case of Wednesbury. Basically, it's the chap on the Clapham omnibus, whether he would consider whatever it was, or going off, to consider whether whatever it was in that opinion to be reasonable. So dependent on the disclosure and the information, it's a judgment call to say, would the reasonable person take this view? And I accept that's a very lawyerish answer, but that's the test. And in terms of the CSV, could you direct me to the page number?
Page 33, best practice number 5.
I could answer that one if that's CSV is the document type. So like an XLS is an Excel spreadsheet. A CSV is a comma separated value sheet. So it has all of the values separated by commas. You can open it in Excel or free software. So it's an open format.
Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I wouldn't have been able to give that answer at all. And then in terms of the document, sorry, Councillor Clark, was your intention to go through the LGA model code?
No, I just had a question further down. Sorry, this is see with going into the Appendix B, the local government ethical standards, the review by the Committee on Standards in Public Life, and it's a question of a general nature question that refers to town and parish councils. On page 43, sorry, it's probably better to go to page 112, actually, where it talks about the recommendations. But it's linked, page 43 and 112 are linked. It's about town and parish councils. And there's a recommendation. Sorry, I keep hesitating because I've got to keep scrolling up and down. It's recommendation 20 on page 112 when I get to it. Right. It talks about adopting the code of conduct of the principal authority, and if my understanding is correct, although this document was published 2 years ago, it's not yet been passed into law, if I'm correct. But is my understanding correct that at the moment, basically, town and parish councils are pretty autonomous, and that this would, in my view, quite rightly, if this came into law, then all local authorities in public life would be able to adhere to the same code of conduct. So we've got some continuity and consistency across how we conduct ourselves. So let's say that does come into law, then would it be then the principal authority then has power to enforce or take action under the code of conduct? I think that's probably the right phrasing of the question.
Yes, it does require legislative change. So it would require a change to the Localism Act for it to come into force. At the moment, my role as monitoring officer extends only to the code of conduct of particular councillors and not necessarily a council as a whole. But I would hope that if legislation were passed to bring that into force, then it would come with some guidance as regards to, well, actually, how then is that must going to be enforced? At the moment, that's not clear.
Right, thank you.
First of all, I must apologise. You probably saw me suddenly disappear from my screen. The lights went off here in the chamber, and it was so dark I couldn't find the light switch. So I'm now back and I can read my paperwork. So if you wonder why I disappeared, that was a reason. Tina Cumberlag, you were the next person to put your hand up. Do you have a question, please?
We may have passed the point, actually. I just wanted to say that if there is further guidance coming out from the LGA, it really seems, whilst ever, yes, we should discuss the item, it's best to do it once we've got all the guidance. Otherwise, we're going to be wasting our time, maybe.
That's a very valid point, Councillor Cambrack, and it's one that I actually did think would be a sensible course of action. So when we have the full guidance, then we can actually start making progress and know what we're actually looking at, rather than at this stage, it's a little bit up in the air and unknown as to quite what the guidance will be.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, I don't know whether Kerry or Debbie was the next two to put their hand up.
It was Debbie.
It was Debbie. Okay, so Debbie, if you'd like to comment.
Okay, thank you. Actually, this is, I think it's just about my first meeting on this committee. I've taken over from Abby Brennan on
It's your
here.
second meeting. You were at the September one.
I was as well. And I did read quite a lot of the 135 pages. As I understood it, as a council, we said that if papers were over 100, we'd get a paper edition of the papers. Yes, I'm not quite sure about that. I'm just asking as a point of interest, really.
Certainly prior to COVID, that you were absolutely correct. But I think with COVID, perhaps that has put a stop to it. But when I ran off 152 pages here, my printer was really quite warm by the time it had finished printing them all. But you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when we have more details and we've got the guidance, perhaps we could ask if Constitutional Services could actually print it all out, because if it's 152 currently, with the guidance, it could be a bit more than that. So when the guidance comes out, I would take that point and suggest Constitutional Services can help us out on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I agree with what has been said, actually. When I put my hand up, I hadn't heard, of course, but I do think that we should wait for the LGA report and look at that. I would be very willing to help out on that if there weren't enough people for the committee. I don't know what size committee what you will be looking for, but I do think it's important that we get it right and that it is the same across the different councils. And as has been said before, it becomes much clearer if everybody abides by the same principles. So I'm definitely all for that, and I'm quite happy to sort of say at the moment, yes, I have looked at and noted it, but I look forward perhaps to seeing and comparing listening to what the LGA have to say. Mm-hmm. As regards the I or the you, I'm a bit conflicted with that. I think, yes, if you're signing something and you have to sign it and you say the word I is very powerful. On the other hand, if the word you is, it tends to be more general and include other people and feel that you are part of something with other people in it who are taking part. Probably on reflection, I probably would go with the you part of it, but I have no really extra strong ideas on that. But I do think that you is more making you feel part of the whole. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. And Kerry.
Thank you. Mine was just to come back to Councillor Clark, because I'd also sort of taken a double take at the reasonable and thought, well, goodness me, everybody will have a different view of reasonable. But in that part that he pulled out, it is actually that you can only disclose after you've spoken to the monitoring officer. So you do have to read right to the bottom of that phrase to get all the ands, because it must be reasonable, it must be in the public interest, it must have passed another test, you must have spoken to the monitoring officers. So there's a lot bundled up together. And I think perhaps it's not necessarily the phrasing, but how we make it clear that that's a bundle of things that you must do.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a very valid comment, Kerry. Do we have any other comments on this report? John, if you'd like to.
in a few months' time, we don't know where we'll be with regard to whether we have to take this on a new LGA document on board, or can continue following our own, or whether we want to adopt one or other, but with amendments from each other. But the areas that I find of interest are that in the LGA document, there's a sort of preamble about the requirement for having a code of conduct, whereas the Gedling one just goes straight into the 7 principles. I quite like that preamble of why one requires and its sort of locus in what's required, and then you go, this is the code. The other thing is, if you compare the two documents, I found in particular that the LGA document seemed to omit much reference, if any, to this business of being objectivity, whether that was with council officers, with outside bodies, or decision making. There seemed to be a great lack of that, to me anyway, in the LGA document. And the other thing that that I thought of was that I've always maintained that the Rushcliffe document was rather light on other interests, and I like very much the table. Is it table 2 or table B in the LGA document?
What page was that on, John? I did get that up earlier on, but what page was that on table 2? Which page is that on?
That's right near the end. Let me say page.
Just so that we're all looking from the same page.
I'll have to re-find that.
I did bring it up a little bit earlier on, actually. In the
page 32.
Page 32, that's good of you.
It's only got one page number on this one, just 32. Other registrable interests.
Yes.
And that is a very good explanation, I think, of other registrable interests, because I think there's an example given on the current Rushcliffe document, but it doesn't sort of itemize the sorts of areas that you might be looking for generically. And I always thought that Rushcliffe's policy on registers and the extent of registers, and I think once we sort of have finished with this, we need to look at what should be included on the register of interest. And a lot of that extension should include the things that are on this table 2.
Yeah, I think this is something that you bring this to a good point forwards. I think it's something that we really should be looking at, because interests are so widespread, but they can actually have a real bearing on the work as a councillor and whether they've actually got interests that they should be declaring. So yes, I would agree with you.
Well, there are all sorts of bodies that people can belong to quite innocently, which over the last 20 years have gone from being just sort of charitable institutions with good works in mind to being very much political animals, either with a big P or a small p. And I think really particularly of the National Trust is getting into that area, the RSPB and the RSPCA, they're all in that sort of line now, that they're very much trying to affect politics in this, both at local and national level, and that they should be declarable.
Do we have any other comments on this, or would we be happy to accept the recommendation that has been put forward to us, or do we want any more comments? Does anybody else have any more comments? Well, if nobody's got any more comments, I'll come to the recommendation, which is A, to note the progress of implementation of the CSPL best practice recommendations by government, and B, consider the LGA model code of conduct and authorise the monitoring officer, if considered appropriate, to make amendments to the Council of Conduct to incorporate all or part of the code, and C, if amended, recommend adoption of the revised code to council. Do I have a proposer for this?
Well, Madam Chairman, surely we talked about a working group. Shouldn't we be recommending that we? I mean, we've done B. We've just considered it, and have generally suggested that we form a working group to consider the code of conduct and make amendments. So I would have suggested that we need to have a
to have a different wording.
reworded B. Basically, I'm happy for Mrs. Searle to come up with her, but basically B, I think, should be to appoint a working group to consider and make amendments to the council's code of conduct. Something along those lines.
Yes. Would you agree with that, Sanjit?
Yeah, almost exactly what I've got written down. So I was propose a revision. Is recommendation A is obviously fine. Recommendation B, to establish a working group to consider the model code of conduct and report back to this committee.
Yes. Fine. Mm-hmm. And C?
Falls away.
Fine. So with that recommendation, which is point B that Sanjit has just outlined, do I have a proposer for this? Debbie? And do I have a seconder? Ben, thank you. And can we have a vote on this, please? Are we in favour? Everyone in favour, please? And anybody against? So the vote is carried. Okay. So that really all just to end the meeting is to thank you for your attendance, and Sanjit will come and I will come up with a date for the working group when the LGA guidance has actually reached us, which, as I say, could be late March, could be late April. So if there's nothing else, then thank you for your attendance, and we hope to get the recommendations coming through fairly quickly, the guidance.